The morning sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across my 5 acres of hard-earned paradise. I had purchased this land 8 years ago when it was nothing but overgrown fields and a dilapidated barn that looked ready to collapse in the next strong wind. Everyone said I was crazy to leave my comfortable apartment in the city for this run-down property 20 miles from civilization. But standing there that morning, watching golden light illuminate the renovated barn and well-maintained pastures, I knew I had made the right choice. I walked the perimeter of my property every morning, a ritual that brought me peace and connection to the land I had transformed with my own hands. The weathered fence posts had been replaced one by one over the years, each representing weekends of labor, calloused hands, and determination. To my right stood the barn, once sagging and dangerous, now sturdy, and painted a traditional red with white trim. It had taken 2 full summers to renovate, but now it stood as the centerpiece of my small homestead. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path as I approached the goat enclosure. The moment they heard me coming, a chorus of bleats erupted from my small herd. These were not just livestock to me. Each had a name, a personality, and a special place in my heart. There was Maverick, the stubborn billy goat with one black ear and one white, who considered himself the protector of the herd. Daisy, the gentle nanny who produced the sweetest milk I had ever tasted. The twins, Salt and Pepper, who were constantly finding ways to escape their enclosure despite my best efforts to secure it. I opened the gate and was immediately surrounded by my eager companions. Their bodies pressed against my legs as I carried the morning feed bucket. These animals depended on me completely. I had raised many of them from birth, nursing the weaker ones through illnesses, staying up through cold nights when they needed extra care. They were the reason I learned to make goat cheese, goat milk soap, and other artisanal products that had slowly built my reputation at the local farmers market. The sound of heavy machinery in the distance broke through my peaceful morning ritual. I glanced toward the noise, squinting at the horizon where yellow bulldozers and construction equipment had been reshaping the landscape for months. The Whispering Pines luxury development was well underway on what used to be Old Man Jenkins' corn fields. When I first heard about the new houses coming in, I had been cautiously optimistic. Perhaps new neighbors would mean new customers for my goat products, or even friends who appreciated country living as much as I did. I poured feed into the troughs and refilled water buckets as I contemplated the changes coming to our quiet rural community. The development company had sent glossy brochures showing spacious homes with manicured lawns, promising an exclusive countryside experience for wealthy city dwellers looking to escape urban pressures. What those brochures failed to mention was how these new residents might react to the realities of rural life, the sounds, the smells, the lack of urban conveniences. The access road to the new development ran uncomfortably close to my eastern property line. During initial planning meetings, there had been vague discussions about easements and shared roadways that made me uneasy. I had carefully reviewed my property documents, confirming that my boundaries were secure, but something told me to remain vigilant. Country living had taught me that good fences make good neighbors, and I had a feeling my fences might soon be tested in ways I never anticipated. The community center had never been so crowded. Every folding chair was filled, and people lined the walls of the small building that normally hosted quilting circles and volunteer firefighter meetings. Today, it was ground zero for what was quickly becoming a clash of cultures. The development company had called this meeting to foster community integration between long-standing residents and the first wave of homeowners moving into Whispering Pines. I sat quietly in the back row, observing more than participating. Most of my farming neighbors wore expressions ranging from cautious to openly suspicious. The developer representatives stood at the front in pressed suits, presenting slides showing community amenities and property value projections. The tension in the room was palpable even before she stood up. Her voice cut through the polite murmuring like a knife. "Excuse me, but I have some concerns that need to be addressed immediately." All heads turned toward a woman in the third row. She wore designer jeans, an expensive-looking blouse, and jewelry that caught the fluorescent lights. Her blonde hair was styled in what I would later learn was called a "Can I speak to your manager, Bob?" This was my first encounter with Karen Winters, though I did not know her name yet. "I paid over $600,000 for my home because I was promised a luxury countryside experience," she continued, her voice carrying an edge of entitlement that made several farmers shift uncomfortably in their seats. But nobody mentioned that I would be subjected to farm animals making noise at all hours, disgusting smells, and dirt roads that are ruining my car's finish. The developer looked uncomfortable, clearing his throat before responding. "Mrs. Winters, as we discussed during your purchase, Whispering Pines is adjacent to working agricultural properties that were here long before our development. Rural zoning allows for—" "I do not care what was here before," she interrupted, gesturing emphatically. "If this is going to be an upscale community, then changes need to be made. There should be noise ordinances, smell regulations, and proper roads. Those of us investing in this community expect certain standards." I noticed several of my farming neighbors exchanging knowing glances. We had seen this before, city folks moving to the country and then trying to make it more like the city they had just left. What made this woman different was the intensity of her conviction and her apparent influence over other new residents who nodded along with her complaints. 2 weeks after that meeting, I spotted an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked along the county road that bordered my property. Through my binoculars, I could see it was her, Karen, using an expensive camera with a long lens to photograph my goats and barn. When I approached and politely asked what she was doing, her response left me stunned. "I am documenting the unsanitary conditions and nuisance animals that are devaluing our community," she said without lowering her camera. "Your goats are loud, they smell, and they do not belong this close to residential homes." "This is a working farm," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "It has been zoned agricultural for decades. My animals are well cared for, and I maintain my property to code." Karen lowered her camera just enough to fix me with a cold stare. "Zoning can be changed. Codes can be updated. The future is coming to this backward area whether you like it or not." Over the next few weeks, I found Karen or her SUV near my property line with increasing frequency. Sometimes she took photos. Other times she appeared to be making notes or measuring distances. When I attempted to introduce myself properly and invite her to see my farm operation up close, to demonstrate that it was clean and professionally run, she rebuffed me with thinly veiled contempt. Then the official notices began arriving. First, it was a letter from the county about a noise complaint. Then another claiming improper manure management, despite my meticulous composting system. Each complaint required me to respond with documentation and sometimes expert testimony to disprove. Each defense cost me time and money I could ill afford. The final straw came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I collected my mail to find an official citation for agricultural nuisance that could result in fines of up to $500 per day until the situation was resolved. As I stood in my driveway, rain soaking through my jacket and the paper in my hands, I watched Karen's SUV drive slowly past. She did not wave or acknowledge me, but I could swear I saw a satisfied smile on her face as she accelerated toward her new luxury home. The rumors reached me through Frank at the feed store. "Heard you are running an illegal animal operation over there," he said as he loaded bags of goat feed into my truck. His tone was joking, but his eyes held concern. "Some lady from that new development has been telling everyone who will listen that your place is a health hazard." I gripped the side of my truck bed so hard my knuckles turned white. "What exactly is she saying, Frank?" "Oh, all kinds of nonsense. That your animals carry disease, that you have got rats because of improper feed storage, that the water runoff from your property is contaminated." Frank shook his head. "None of us are buying it, of course. We have known you for years, but the new folks do not have that history with you." As I drove home, Frank's words echoed in my mind. It was one thing for Karen to file complaints with county officials. Those I could fight with facts and documentation. But poisoning my reputation in the community struck at something deeper. My farm products depended on trust and goodwill. If people believed her claims, my small business could suffer irreparable damage. The next morning brought a disturbing discovery. Walking my property line, I noticed that several of my survey stakes had been moved, pulled from the ground and repositioned several feet inside what I knew to be my boundary. The metal posts I had used to mark my property line had been tampered with as well, some bent and others missing entirely. My no trespassing signs that had been posted every 50 feet were torn down, with only scraps of wood and metal remaining. That same day, I ordered security cameras. They were an expense I had not budgeted for, but now they seemed essential. While waiting for them to arrive, I documented the property damage with photographs and reported it to the county sheriff's office. The deputy who took my report was sympathetic but not especially helpful. "Without proof of who did it, there is not much we can do," he explained. "Could have been local kids, could have been animals. Keep an eye out and call us if you catch someone in the act." The cameras arrived 3 days later. I spent a full weekend installing them at strategic locations around my property, focusing on the boundaries nearest to Whispering Pines and the areas around my barn and goat enclosure. It did not take long for them to capture activity. The very first night, shadowy figures appeared at my eastern fence line after midnight. The resolution was not good enough in the darkness to identify faces, but I could clearly see people measuring and marking along my property boundary. I printed still frames from the footage and brought them to the sheriff's office the next morning. The same deputy reviewed them with a frown. "Still not clear enough to identify anyone specifically," he said, "but I will send a patrol car by your place more frequently for a while." The confrontation I had been dreading finally happened on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon. I was repairing one of the damaged fence sections when a now familiar SUV pulled up on the access road. Karen stepped out, wearing inappropriate footwear for the muddy conditions, and holding an umbrella that did little to protect her from the wind-driven rain. "We need to talk about access," she announced without preamble, gesturing toward my property. "The road to the back section of our development is inconveniently long. There needs to be a throughway here across your land." I stood up slowly, mud caking my work gloves. "That would cut my property in half. It would go right through my goat pasture." Karen made a dismissive gesture. "You could move the animals. This is about convenience for over 40 homeowners versus one person with some goats. Surely you can see which should take priority." "This is private property," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "I have no obligation to provide a shortcut for your development." Her eyes narrowed. "The homeowners association is prepared to make it worth your while. We would pay for the road construction, of course." "It is not for sale, not at any price." Karen's face hardened. "You should understand that there are other ways to address this situation. The county commissioners are very interested in development that increases the tax base. Agricultural exemptions like yours cost the county revenue. Are you threatening me? I asked, rain running down my face and mixing with the anger heating my skin. I am informing you of political realities, she replied coolly. Change is coming. You can profit from it or be run over by it. Your choice. With that, she turned and picked her way carefully back to her vehicle, leaving me standing in the rain. That evening, I drove to the county clerk's office before closing time. The clerk, an older woman who had known my family for years, helped me search through recent filings. What we found confirmed my suspicions. Karen Winters had submitted multiple petitions to the county commissioners and planning board, requesting rezoning reviews, challenging agricultural exemptions, and suggesting new ordinances that would effectively make traditional farming impossible near residential areas. Most disturbing was a proposal for eminent domain consideration for critical infrastructure that included a road through what was unmistakably my property. The rain had not let up by the time I returned home that evening. As I turned into my driveway, my headlights illuminated fresh damage. My mailbox had been smashed, the metal post bent nearly to the ground. I got out of my truck and stood in the downpour, surveying the damage with a strange calm that had replaced my earlier anger. Something had shifted inside me. This was no longer about tolerating a difficult neighbor. This was war over my way of life, and I would not be the one to surrender my ground. The panicked bleeding jolted me awake before my alarm. Something was wrong. I threw on clothes and boots, running outside while still buttoning my flannel shirt. The sound came from the direction of the goat enclosure, but it was wrong, too distant, too scattered. My stomach dropped as I rounded the corner of the barn. The gate stood open. The fence had been cut in multiple places, clean slices through the wire that could only have been made with proper cutting tools. Most of my goats were gone. Maverick, Daisy, I called out, scanning the property desperately. Only 2 goats remained in the enclosure, looking confused and agitated. The others had scattered. I ran back to the house for my phone and a flashlight, then returned to assess the damage more carefully. The cuts were precise and deliberate. This was no accident, no fallen tree branch or failed equipment. Someone had intentionally released my animals. The next 4 hours were a blur of frantic searching. I followed hoof prints across muddy fields, calling names until my voice grew hoarse. I found Salt and Pepper together nearly a half-mile away, huddled under a stand of pine trees. 3 more goats were located near the creek that bordered my western property line. But 2 were still missing, including Daisy, one of my most valuable milk producers, and her young kid who was barely 2 months old. The rain had started again, a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through my clothes and made tracking even more difficult. It was nearly noon when I heard weak bleeding from the direction of the county road. I sprinted toward the sound, my heart in my throat. There, trapped in a roadside drainage ditch, was Daisy. She was lying on her side, clearly injured, with her kid huddled against her. Getting them out of the ditch and back to the barn was an ordeal that left me covered in mud and tears. Daisy had a deep laceration on her hind leg that would require veterinary attention. Her kid was physically unharmed but terrified, trembling violently against my chest as I carried him. Once all the goats were secured in the barn and I had called the veterinarian, I finally had a moment to check the security camera footage. I sat at my kitchen table, still in my mud-soaked clothes, and rewound to the early morning hours. The image that appeared on my screen sent a wave of cold rage through my body. There she was, Karen Winters, dressed in dark clothing but clearly identifiable, methodically cutting my fence with what looked like professional wire cutters. The camera captured her opening the gate and making noises to frighten the goats, deliberately driving them toward the road. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. I downloaded the footage onto a flash drive and drove immediately to the sheriff's office, still covered in mud and smelling of wet goat. The same deputy who had taken my previous reports viewed the footage with a frown. "I can see someone there," he admitted, "but the resolution is not clear enough to positively identify Mrs. Winters beyond reasonable doubt. The figure is wearing dark clothing and appears to have similar hair, but defense attorneys would tear this apart." "She deliberately released my animals near a busy road," I said, my voice shaking. "One is seriously injured. They could have been killed or caused an accident." The deputy sighed. "Look, I believe you, but without clearer footage or other evidence, this remains a civil matter. You can file a lawsuit for damages, but that is about it for now." "So she gets away with it?" I asked incredulously. "I did not say that. Document everything. Get better cameras. If she tries something again and you get clearer evidence, we can act." He paused, then added more quietly, "Sometimes people like this get bolder when they think they are untouchable. Just be ready." I returned home to find the veterinarian finishing Daisy's treatment. The prognosis was guardedly optimistic. She would recover if infection did not set in, but she would not be producing milk for some time. The vet's bill was $380 I could ill afford after all the legal expenses from fighting Karen's previous complaints. That night, as rain pattered on the roof, I sat at my kitchen table with maps of my property spread out before me. I marked every boundary, every access point, every vulnerable spot. I researched higher-resolution security cameras with night vision capabilities and motion-activated floodlights. I created detailed logs of every incident, complete with dates, times, and descriptions. As I worked through the night, something shifted inside me. The rain finally stopped outside, and with its end came a clarity I had not felt before. I would protect what was mine, not just the property and animals, but the way of life I had built here. Karen Winters had declared war on the wrong farmer. The security system alert jolted me awake at 4:32 a.m. My phone screen illuminated the darkness of my bedroom with multiple notifications from the new high-definition cameras I had installed around my property. I tapped on the first alert, and my blood ran cold. The footage showed Karen Winters, dressed entirely in black, slipping through a gap in the tree line that bordered my property. She carried a backpack and moved with purposeful stealth toward my barn. I sat up in bed, fully alert now, and switched to the live feed. The night vision camera showed her clearly as she approached the barn door, glancing furtively over her shoulder before testing the handle. Finding it unlocked, I often left it open for air circulation on warm nights. She slipped inside. I immediately switched to the interior barn camera I had installed just 3 days earlier. The image was crystal clear. Karen was inside my barn, removing items from her backpack. First came a flashlight which she set on a hay bale to illuminate her work. Then gloves, which she pulled on methodically. Finally, several cans of spray paint. My goats, awakened by the intrusion, had retreated to the far corner of the enclosure inside the barn, watching nervously as this stranger invaded their space. I watched in real time as she shook a can of red spray paint and began writing on the interior barn wall. "ANIMALS will be removed." The bold letters dripped ominously in the flashlight beam. She moved to another wall and continued, "Final warning." A cold, calculated calm settled over me. This was what I had been waiting for, irrefutable evidence of trespassing and vandalism. But more than that, it was an opportunity to ensure Karen faced consequences for her actions. I dressed quietly but quickly, pulling on jeans, a flannel shirt, and my work boots. I grabbed my phone and a set of keys before slipping out of the house. The pre-dawn air was heavy with moisture, a light mist hanging over the fields as I made my way toward the barn. I moved silently, having learned to walk these paths blindfolded over years of midnight checks on newborn kids or sick animals. The main door where Karen had entered faced away from my approach, allowing me to circle around to the rear of the building undetected. My barn had 4 access points: the main double doors at the front, a side door near the feed storage, a rear door that opened to the pasture, and a smaller maintenance access on the opposite side. Karen had entered through the main doors, leaving the others available to me. I approached the rear door first, inserting the key into the padlock that normally stayed unlocked during the day. The tumbler clicked quietly as I secured it. Moving clockwise around the building, I repeated the process at the small maintenance access door, then crossed to the feed storage entrance. With each lock secured, Karen's potential exits dwindled. Only the main door remained, the same one she had entered through. I crept toward the front of the barn, careful to stay out of sight of the large windows where she might spot movement. Inside, I could hear the metallic rattle of spray cans and the occasional nervous bleat from my goats. Through a crack in the barn boards, I glimpsed Karen working methodically, covering more wall space with threats and slurs about my farm. The goats had begun to move around more actively, disturbed by the chemical smell and the stranger's presence. Maverick, always the protector, had positioned himself between the intruder and the younger goats, pawing occasionally at the ground in a warning display Karen seemed oblivious to. I reached the main doors and slowly, carefully pulled them closed. The heavy timber made barely a sound as it settled into place. Karen, focused on her vandalism and with her back to the doors, noticed nothing. With trembling hands, not from fear but from restrained anger, I secured the final padlock, effectively sealing Karen inside with my increasingly agitated goat herd. Standing back from the doors, I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's department. "County Sheriff's Office," came the dispatcher's voice. "This is Jackson Miller at Hillside Farm on County Road 22, I said, my voice steady. "I need to report a breaking and entering in progress. I have an intruder locked inside my barn. She is vandalizing my property." "Is anyone in danger, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "No immediate danger," I replied, watching through a knothole as Karen continued her destructive work, still unaware of her predicament. "The suspect is contained. She is locked in my barn, and I have video evidence of her breaking in and vandalizing my property. This is the same person I have filed multiple reports about previously." "Deputies will be dispatched immediately," the dispatcher assured me. "Please do not confront the individual. Remain at a safe distance until officers arrive." "I will stay right here," I promised, settling onto an overturned bucket with a clear view of the barn doors. "I am not going anywhere." It was only a matter of time before Karen realized her situation. I heard it before I saw it, a sudden cry of frustration as she tried the main doors and found them secured. Through the knothole, I watched her expression transform from confusion to alarm as she moved rapidly around the interior, testing each exit only to find it locked. Her growing panic was visible in her jerky movements and increasingly frantic attempts to find a way out. The goats, already unsettled by her presence and the paint fumes, began responding to her erratic behavior with increasing agitation. Maverick advanced a few steps, head lowered in warning. The others began circling, their natural curiosity and territorial instincts activated by her distress. Karen backed against a wall, suddenly aware that she was not only trapped but surrounded by animals she clearly feared. "Let me out of here right now," she shouted, loud enough for her voice to carry through the thick wooden walls. "I know you are out there. This is kidnapping." I made no response, simply watching through my vantage point as she reached for her phone, presumably to call for help. The look of dismay on her face when she found no signal inside the metal-roofed barn brought me a satisfaction I was not proud of but could not deny. The goats moved closer, investigating this strange, noisy creature in their space. Karen screamed when Maverick nudged her leg, swatting ineffectually at him, which only provoked more interest from the herd. They were not threatening her. Goats are naturally curious rather than aggressive, but to someone unfamiliar with farm animals, their horns and intense stares could certainly seem intimidating. Dawn was breaking fully now, painting the misty fields gold as I heard the distant wail of approaching sirens. Karen heard them too, renewing her efforts to escape with increased desperation. Through my peephole, I watched as she tried to climb onto hay bales to reach a high window, only to slip back down when the bales shifted under her weight. Her designer clothes were now covered in dust and hay, her carefully styled hair in disarray, and her face streaked with tears of frustration and fear. The goats, finding this game entertaining, followed her every move, encircling her whenever she stopped, bleating and nudging at her unfamiliar presence. From my vantage point outside, I allowed myself a grim smile of satisfaction. "Sometimes," I whispered to myself, "justice comes on four hooves." The sheriff's vehicles appeared through the morning mist, red and blue lights cutting through the golden sunrise. 2 patrol cars pulled into my gravel driveway, followed by an unmarked SUV that I recognized as belonging to Sheriff Miller himself. The fact that the county sheriff had come personally suggested someone had recognized the name of the intruder when I gave it to dispatch. I stood as the officers approached, noticing that Deputy Johnson, the same one who had taken my previous reports, was among them. His expression was professionally neutral, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he was not entirely displeased by the situation. "Mr. Miller," Sheriff Miller greeted me, no relation despite our shared surname. "I understand you have an intruder contained." "Yes, sir," I replied, gesturing toward the barn where Karen's shouts could still be heard, punctuated by the bleating of goats. "She broke in around 4:30 this morning. I have everything on video, the breaking and entering, the vandalism, all of it. She is the same woman I have filed reports about previously." The sheriff nodded. "Mrs. Winters, yes, we are familiar with her. She has been rather active at county meetings lately." He did not elaborate, but his tone spoke volumes about those interactions. "You said you have video evidence." I pulled out my phone and showed them the security footage, starting with Karen's arrival on my property and continuing through her entry into the barn and the vandalism. The deputies watched with increasing interest, occasionally exchanging glances. "And she is still in there now?" Deputy Johnson asked, gesturing toward the barn. "Yes, all exits are locked. She is secure but unharmed." I paused before adding, "She is sharing the space with my goat herd. They are calm animals but naturally curious." The corner of Deputy Johnson's mouth twitched slightly. "I see. And you called us immediately after securing the premises." "Yes, sir. I did not confront her or communicate with her in any way." Sheriff Miller nodded approvingly. "That was the right approach. We will take it from here." He turned to his deputies. "Johnson, Peters, approach the main doors. I want a clear announcement of police presence before entry." As the deputies moved toward the barn, I followed Sheriff Miller to his vehicle, where he retrieved a clipboard with official forms. "I am going to need a full statement from you," he explained. "But first, let us resolve the current situation." The deputies had reached the main barn doors. "Sheriff's Department," Deputy Johnson called out clearly. "We are entering the premises. Remain calm and keep your hands visible." When they unlocked and opened the doors, the scene that greeted them was one I wish I could have photographed for posterity. Karen Winters, whose immaculate appearance had been a constant during our previous encounters, stood in the center of the barn, surrounded by my goats. Her designer black outfit was covered in hay and dust. What had once been perfectly styled hair now stuck out at odd angles, decorated with bits of straw. Her face, usually set in a mask of superiority, was streaked with tears and dirt. Most satisfyingly, there was a distinct hoof print on the back of her expensive black pants, where one of the goats had apparently stepped on her. "Officers, thank goodness," she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "This man trapped me in here with these dangerous animals. I want him arrested immediately." Deputy Johnson maintained his professional demeanor as he assessed the situation. "Ma'am, please step outside slowly. Keep your hands where we can see them." As she was escorted out of the barn, Karen continued her tirade. "I demand this man be arrested for imprisonment. Do you have any idea who my husband is? He plays golf with Judge Richardson." Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "Mrs. Winters, you are currently trespassing on private property. We have video evidence of you breaking and entering, as well as vandalism. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The shock on Karen's face was profound. "You are arresting me. This is outrageous. I was inspecting. These animals are a nuisance." "You have the right to remain silent," Sheriff Miller continued, unfazed by her protests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the deputies handcuffed Karen, I noticed movement at the edge of my property. Several vehicles had parked along the county road, and people were gathering to watch the proceedings. I recognized some of them as long-time farming neighbors, but others were residents from Whispering Pines. Word had spread quickly. While Karen was secured in the back of a patrol car, still shouting threats and demands, Sheriff Miller returned to take my formal statement. I provided him with digital copies of all my security footage, as well as my logs documenting the escalating harassment I had experienced. "I have to ask," the sheriff said as he reviewed my documentation, "how did you happen to have such comprehensive security measures in place?" "After the incident with my fence being cut and my goats being released onto the road, I invested in better security," I explained. "One of my animals was injured in that incident. I wanted to make sure it did not happen again." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Smart move. This is some of the most thorough documentation I have seen from a property owner." He glanced toward the patrol car where Karen was still visibly fuming. "Between you and me, Mrs. Winters has made quite a name for herself since arriving in our county, not in a good way." As we completed the paperwork, Deputy Johnson approached with an interesting development. "Sheriff, I ran Mrs. Winters' information through the system. There are multiple complaints filed against her in Riverside County, where she lived previously. Similar pattern: harassment of neighbors, property disputes, frivolous complaints to authorities." Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, that certainly paints a clearer picture." He turned to me. "Mr. Miller, the district attorney will likely want to speak with you about pressing charges. Given the evidence and Mrs. Winters' history, I believe they will take this case quite seriously." As the morning progressed, more neighbors gathered at the edge of my property. I was surprised when several residents from Whispering Pines approached me directly after the patrol car carrying Karen had departed. "We want you to know that she does not represent all of us," said an older gentleman who introduced himself as retired Judge Harmon. Some of us moved here specifically because we appreciate rural life and want to be good neighbors. Another Whispering Pines resident, a woman named Alina, added, "She has been making our lives miserable too, constantly filing HOA complaints about trivial things, trying to force everyone to follow her vision of what the community should be." As I stood there in my mud-splattered work clothes, surrounded by neighbors both old and new, the morning sunlight broke fully through the mist. It illuminated my barn, my fields, and my goats now peacefully grazing as if nothing unusual had happened. For the first time since the development had begun, I felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps there was a path forward that preserved both my way of life and welcomed change. News travels quickly in small communities. By sunset, the story of Karen's barn imprisonment had spread throughout 3 counties. Local social media groups buzzed with accounts, some accurate, some wildly embellished, of how the goat lady had finally stood up to the HOA queen. My phone rang constantly with calls from neighbors offering support and congratulations, though I took little pleasure in someone else's downfall, regardless of how deserved it might have been. The most surprising call came 3 days later from Philip Winters, Karen's husband. Unlike his wife, his voice carried a tone of embarrassed sincerity. "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior," he said after introducing himself. "I had no idea things had gone this far. I travel frequently for work, and Karen had, well, she had presented a very different version of events to me." I remained silent, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected olive branch. "The truth is," he continued into my silence, "this is not the first neighborhood where this has happened. We left our previous community under similar circumstances, though not quite as dramatic." He sighed heavily. "Karen is getting professional help now. It was part of her bail conditions."